Joining us live, we've got Dan Perry, who's an international affairs expert, joining us from Tel Aviv in Israel. Dan, thanks very much for coming back on the Bulletin today. It's a pleasure to have you back. Thanks for your time. Now, I've heard from some analysts that the US is winning the battles but losing the war. And we've heard here that negotiations have slowed down due to a bit of a lack of response from Tehran. Does the Iranian regime have incentives to head into these negotiations if their main goal in this war is simply to outlast the United States and Israel?
It's clear they feel they don't, because even in Trump's speech late last week, we saw very clearly that he is setting out a timeline where he's promising the American people who want the war to end soon that it will end soon. So from the Iranian perspective, if their only hope of a victory narrative is the very fact that they survived, logically, all they have to do is outlast that timeline. And in that context, there's no particular reason for them to give the Americans what they want. And what do the Americans want? I can see a number of different scenarios that could have led to an end to the war. Originally, the American ambition, and certainly the Israeli ambition, included regime change in Iran. That seems, at this point, unlikely in the context of the war. It could happen after, because the regime has been weakened. But it looks like the regime itself, although not all the individuals at the head of the regime, will survive the war if Trump says it'll end in a few weeks. The US and Israel had also hoped to impose terms on Iran to change the regime's behavior on the missile program, the nuclear program, and their support for militias around the region. The regime also shows no signs of agreeing to, from what their perspective would be, surrender terms. Again, why should they, from their perspective, if they're willing to absorb tremendous material damage simply to outlast the campaign, then there's no reason for them to give that. Presumably, the incentive would have been to prevent the material damage. But the Iranians do show signs of being indifferent to the destruction that Trump is visiting upon them. Therefore, of course, his inclination is to threaten yet more damage, and they're going to be thinking we can outlast that too, because no matter how badly we're battered, we can still oppress our people and stay in power. The future will show if that could conceivably work, or whether the oppressed Iranian people will rise up against a now weakened regime, because it has been weakened. The worst scenario for Trump is that he ends the war, claims victory because he's battered the regime and killed a bunch of its leaders, but leaves the Strait of Hormuz unopened. If that happens, then Iran will have shown that it can cause significant damage to the global economy through this asymmetric warfare, whereby the US and Israel can throw at them incredibly expensive, complex, and sophisticated military means, and it doesn't really matter, because with a few drones that are worth $20,000 apiece, they can asymmetrically cause damage across the globe. And if that really is allowed to stand, then well, it's a victory of sorts for the Iranians, but it may be a Pyrrhic one, because then they'll have the entire world making sure that the regime must be gone. But that's where we're headed. It seems the Iranians want to use this war as a lesson to show they can damage the world economy through asymmetric means. And of course, that attaches also to the asymmetric means that the Ukrainians have used in their own quite successful defense against an onslaught from a far more powerful, in conventional terms, Russian army.
Interesting note there, Dan. So, of course, Pakistan has put itself forward in this case as the mediator. If these negotiations were to go forward successfully, and we were to see Iranian officials and American officials meet in Islamabad, what would this do for Pakistan's international standing? Of course, they've been associated with terrorist groups in the past, and several other crises. They're currently in a conflict with Afghanistan. So what would this do for Pakistan's international standing if they were able to successfully put through negotiations and put a resolution to this conflict?
That depends, of course, on the terms that come out of that effort. If the terms are wonderful in some consensual way for the entire world, then that would help its international standing. Vis-a-vis the US in particular, there's an interesting dynamic here, because Pakistan has been a major ally of the US in theory. The Pakistani army has been, in theory, a major ally of the US. In reality, however, the Pakistanis have played games for decades, flirting with support of the Taliban, engaging in all kinds of chicaneries in the tribal regions where they've tolerated all kinds of militia operations, and it's a very ugly situation where the Pakistani regime essentially appears two-faced, and it actually is two-faced because the government is one thing, and the military and the intelligence infrastructure in that country is another. So this highly problematic ally might stand to emerge buffed and scrubbed and shinier from all this if the Americans end up grateful that they were instrumental in bringing an end to the war that does not amount to not a defeat for the U.S. because the U.S. can't be defeated against Iran, but doesn't end up looking like a failure. If they enable Trump to spin this into a win, then he will doubtless be grateful, and that will help the Pakistanis. If indeed they want to stop behaving as they have been and become a truly dependable ally of the West and of the United States.
If we do see damage to nuclear facilities, could we see a dangerous ramping up in the rhetoric and the actions in this war beyond what we've already seen? Of course, we've seen hits to civilian facilities, but nuclear facilities present a much greater risk in terms of pollution, in terms of health risks, in terms of rebuilding as well. What could we see if we do actually see hits to nuclear facilities on both sides now?
Well, remember, not every nuclear facility, research facility, or otherwise is in fact constituting a danger of radioactive fallout. Not everything is an active nuclear reactor. Nonetheless, attacks on nuclear facilities, in theory, in some cases, could involve the danger of a radiation event. That's something that needs to be taken into account. Moreover, with the target bank that you have in Iran, there's a clear difference between what would be, in some consensual way, indisputably a legitimate target for the Americans and the Israelis from the framework of their effort to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb versus civilian facilities where striking at them involves Iranian civilian infrastructure, which could be seen as a form of leverage against the regime, putting pressure against them. Presumably the people of Iran will be unhappy to not have electricity, and maybe then it would support the regime. That's a model that the Iranians are assuming can be put into play, but I'm not so sure it'll work. It isn't necessarily clear that the Iranian people, if their infrastructure is damaged, would blame the attackers and not the regime that most of them hate. It isn't clear what that would do to public opinion in Iran. What is, however, clear is that it's a ramping up of the war strategy to attack in a way that is at scale civilian infrastructure, bridges, roads, facilities that have nothing to do with the military, the IRGC or the siege, oil fields. Trump in his speech claimed he's going to bomb Iran into the Stone Age if they don't stop misbehaving. That is, in fact, to telegraph the intention to commit a war crime. I don't take it seriously. I don't take him literally. I don't take Trump at his word almost ever. But it shows that the Americans are at least willing to try to scare the Iranians into behaving better. I fear it won't work if at the same time Trump is also saying that the war will wind down in a few weeks. The Iranians, as you suggested in your first question, can simply try to wait it out and then just rebuild. So there's little to be gained if that is really how it's going to go from attacks on Iranian civilian infrastructure that will only give sympathy to the regime, which I would say it does simply not deserve.
Mm-hmm. Dan, thanks very much for your time today and coming on the show, and please stay safe over there in Israel.